Well, welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the egos of all other people at the table. I am your host, Dungeon Master Mitch, and I'm really excited about today's episode. We are going to be talking today about a world where magic has completely disappeared. It's gone. Magic no more. And for that, we have the guest Nate from WASD20, the YouTube channel, joining us. It's going to be a great discussion. I'm glad that you've joined us for it today. Before we jump into that, though, we have a 5-star review to give a shout out to. This review is from Badiakos from Apple Podcasts. 5 out of 5. Happily blew through the whole backlog. I've been a DM on and off for about 15 years. No matter how much experience you have, it's crucial to keep learning from other DMs or players. This show is great. Entertaining, a great sense of humor, clever ideas throughout, and absolutely genius concepts for episodes. Hey, let's do an episode about underwater campaigns. We'll have a marine biologist who also happens to be a DM and interview him. Think you're a level 20 DM? Listen to DMB and break into epic levels. Oh man, what a great review. I really love that. Thank you so much for sending us in that review. And without any further ado, let's get into this week's meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meat?
Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys.
So today for the meat, as you've already heard, we're going to be talking about a world that has no more magic. And the joke that I thought of was Magic the Gathering has finally gathered and they left. And now your local gaming store closed because it's the only thing that keeps it open. But today we have a very special guest. We have Nate Vanderzee of the WASD20 YouTube channel. Nate, thanks for coming.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, guys. It's a pleasure.
We're excited to have you as a guest on the show. And for anybody out there listening, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I make YouTube videos, mostly about Dungeons and Dragons and also about fantasy maps and other RPGs. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, and went to college here in Michigan, where I am now, and I studied to be a teacher. So I'm in my day job, I'm a high school teacher, and I do technology work, but a lot of my time outside of that is spent making videos, playing games, world building, drawing maps, and this whole other awesome RPG life that I live down here in my basement.
That's fantastic. I forgot about that because I saw that on your Twitter that you were based here in Michigan. Am I wrong in remembering that you're near Grand Rapids?
I am. Yep, I'm in Grand Rapids.
I am as well. Maybe we need to meet up.
Okay,
sometime.
hold on.
Live
Hold
podcast.
Hold on, though.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's keep the weirdness going because I feel like we've titrated our entire network into one human being because we have an additional podcast that is called Detentions and Dragons where it's 2 teachers focused on bringing D&D to the classroom. Celeste still lives in Seattle, Washington. You are our network. This is great.
Wow. I am at the center of the things.
That's so good.
That's cool.
He is the PC character that we've created for our campaign. Thanks for sharing that with us, Nate. We appreciate it.
So like you mentioned, you have content that we really think that our listeners would enjoy. So could you tell us a little bit more about WASD20?
Yeah, so I started the channel really as to document my journey into tabletop role-playing games. I was brand new at the time. This is now about 6 years ago, I think. And it was very clear right off the bat that the PC game side of things, which is where the WASD comes from, was not really taken off very much because everyone's making Let's Play videos, and it's a flooded market. It's hard to break into that. People are still doing it, but and the tabletop RPG side of things really was taking off. People wanted to hear what I had to say and were interested, and so I pretty quickly, as I started learning tabletop RPGs, had a passion for teaching. And so I made some character creation tutorials, and eventually I started making some how to play D&D videos. And I stumbled through a lot of that because I was very new to it and was getting stuff wrong all the time, but kept on going, and here I am still getting stuff wrong once in a while. And
Yep.
and then the other side of it that really took off was the fantasy map side. So I made it just a how to draw fantasy maps video, or it wasn't even how to. It was just like, let's draw a fantasy map, and just wanted to try it for the first time and hit record, and people loved that, so I kept doing it, and started kept improving in my map drawing, and so that's another thing that people kind of come to my channel for.
That's fantastic. And I'm sure you would echo things that we've said on the show, where like going into those projects that you're trying to create good content for your viewers, for your listeners, it only helps to make you better in your tabletop role-playing experience. And I guarantee that when you get together with your friends and you have these beautifully drawn maps, like, it's for your own personal enjoyment, it's something that really adds to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I will say this, because I spend so much time making D&D videos,
oh no, here it comes.
I have far less time than I would like to play D&D.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like 10, 15 hours a week of my life.
Yep.
And I still have an almost full-time job. I'm like 80% at the school. And that's the downside. It's like, man, I feel like I could make better videos if I DM'd more. And but I'm too busy making videos. And so anyway,
you have to pay your bills.
Maybe I should take just a year off and just DM every week.
It's your sabbatical.
There you go. Sabbatical.
Fantastic.
I like it.
Well, we've got one more question for you. This one is a surprise question. It comes from one of our Patreon dragons, and it comes from DM Jude. And DM Jude asks you, what is your favorite Dungeons and Dragons world/campaign setting from any edition?
Okay. So official campaign setting, like one that was published by...
I think that's what he's looking for.
Yeah. Okay, so honestly, I don't have very much experience with any of them. The one I definitely have most experience with is Forgotten Realms, Faerun, because I was reading those novels when I was a kid before I ever even picked up a D20. And because I played some of the
Did you, when
games.
you were reading the novels, were you aware that the tabletop game was a thing?
I was aware that it was a game people played. I didn't maybe know even that word tabletop at the time. I mean, it was just like, all I knew was that it was evil and I should never touch it.
Yep.
And I'm serious.
A lot of us have the same story. We've heard many people share these.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that honestly, like especially one of my friend's moms, kind of scared me away from it for a long time.
Yeah.
She was a kind of like demon under every rock sort of person. So, so that was kind of sad. But I did read the novels, and so anyway, to get back to the question, I probably have to choose that one because it's the only one I know really well. But. And I just have a lot of nostalgia for it, like the Durisk novels, the Dark Elf trilogy and all that stuff, Icewind Dale. So good. But I really am attracted to Dark Sun. That's the one that I want in 5th edition more than any other. And part of it's the art from the original art from Brahm is just amazing. But also just that kind of, I don't know, just wasteland sort of. It's a harsh world and
apocalyptic kind of.
And it's different, right? It's different enough from what I think of as the standard, which is Forgotten Realms, Faerun.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Nate, for that answer. And thank you to DM Jude for asking that question. Let's move into the topic of this episode. As Neal said, we're going to be talking about the idea of magic no more. So we're not talking about a world without magic, a fantasy world without magic. What we're talking about is a world that had magic to whatever degree that is, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, there is no more magic, which to me I find to be extremely interesting to talk about. So I guess the first thing to talk about is something has to happen, right, to get us from this point of a world with magic to a point of a world without magic. So what are some things in a fantasy setting that can happen that can bring about this change where magic no longer exists? What do you guys think?
Well, I think, it could be anything. My immediate thought, this is kind of ridiculous, was, a cataclysmic event, right? Was actually what caused the dinosaurs to probably go extinct, right? A meteor. What if something from space hits a planet and just throws everything off balance? Just kind of a crazy thought that just came to my mind, even though I've had weeks to think about this topic.
No, it's all in the moment. That's the best stuff right there.
Yeah, and in one of my game worlds, a lot of the magic is actually drawn from the earth and the stones. There are actually certain stones, a certain kind of rock that magic is drawn from. And so, I mean, if that's true, the opposite could also be true, where this alien substance into this world and leeches the magic or throws off the balance.
Well, now I'm thinking about something like that actually happening and how that would play out if you were a DM and you explain to your players, you see this thing hurtling towards the earth from the sky, of course the players are going to say, let's go check that thing out. And I imagine that the players, and any other people that go and check that thing out, in a world that has magic, one of the answers to trying to figure out what is going on is by using magic. Let's cast detect magic. And, your spell doesn't work. And then that line of thinking will lead your players to maybe this rock or whatever it is giving off some anti-magic field. Okay, something that we've dealt with before, right? But then, there is this progression from, we're near the rock and no magic is happening, to traveling back to the city and, wait, no magic is working in the city? Then you're getting word from other places around the globe, which perhaps is even extremely slower because perhaps messaging has been magical means up until this point, but this slow progression of figuring out, oh my gosh, this is a global blackout of magic. That to me just sound I would love to watch the light bulb go off in a player's right above a player's head when they're starting to put the pieces together of this is not just one small incident.
Yeah, and you have to ask some really interesting questions of one, you should probably know how magic works in your world. This is a key component to breaking and taking it away. And then also, what level do you want it to be at? Because it could be something that everyone was doing, that everyone messed up together, or it could be at the deity level. So figuring out where those questions are so that you can figure out where those answers are going to come from.
I want to push back a little bit, Neal, because I would almost say that you don't have to. It's cool if you do want to, but on another level, it's magic. So maybe you don't have this set out, this is how magic works in my world. And that is the element here that it's magic is gone and we don't know why.
Yeah, I think, this kind of gets in line with maybe the religious views of your world too, and the deities, the place of deities. Do the inhabitants really understand the place of deities, or are they trying and grasping at ways of describing a mystery? And it could be guided by a deity that slammed this stone into your world to take away magic. And I also think it's interesting, that whole mystery idea. I recently, well, probably not recently, maybe a year or two ago, I think it was a Brandon Sanderson talk maybe, or maybe it was an article. I can't remember what it was, but there's kind of this debate over, should we try to understand magic as writers of fiction? And the same then applies for us as dungeon masters. I mean, is it better to have it a mystery, or is it better to have a defined system? And there's debate among authors about that, which works better.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe there's even a middle ground of maybe it is very useful for you as the DM, if you're talking about a homebrew world, to have an understanding, or at least some understanding and some rules, right? Something that you can work within, so that when you come to DM your games in your own homebrew world, having that understanding will lead you in the way that you have magic work. But then not to say, oh, you need to keep these things secret from your players, but it doesn't have to be something that outright all of the people in your world have this understanding for. And maybe that's something that could go for like years and years, like in real time, and campaigns upon campaigns where your players are starting to pick up and start to understand things and put together pieces of how magic works in your world.
Yeah, I think that's really cool, and that can be, in terms of making players feel significant while still making it feel realistic, like the world doesn't rotate around them necessarily. Like, I think that's a really cool thing, is that the players are discovering some deep mysteries of this world.
Yeah.
And one of those could be magic and the way it works.
Yeah, Nate, you brought up deities, and I think that's something that when we're talking about D&D especially, and the way that the game mechanics work, it is something that has to be brought up here. Is like, when we talk about magic no more, are we talking about arcane magic? Are we talking about divine magic? Are we talking about magic completely gone? And honestly, if we're thinking about like that this loss of magic has something to do with the gods, to me it would make sense that the gods ceasing divine magic might also cease all other types of magic, because like druidic magic, does that not, or can that not come from gods that are tied into nature? Arcane magic, can that not be tied into the gods that are tied into the arcane? And so it certainly could be an event that magic is gone because gods have, for whatever reason, deemed it so that it's like, no, this might even be something that your PCs bring on to the world. If you play in a campaign where you have PCs that are trying to kill a god, or to foil a god's plans in some way, that might lead to a chain reaction between all the gods saying, the mortals have gone too far. It's time we take this power away from them.
That's so many ideas. So from the very beginning, and I have to say it so that I don't have to think about it anymore, when you mentioned the meteor hitting this world, the idea I thought of was like interstellar ley lines. And so like basically it's thrown it off and a little bit out of where it needs to be, and then that's it. You don't have the connection anymore. And like, then my other thought was like, oh, well, that does not sound like a level 1 campaign, but trying to figure out like where that all fits into it. And then, well, gosh, what was the other one? I lost my track. I'm so focused now on the interstellar version and it pulling it in. But the other thing was like that cascading effect of, now I'm on Mitch's side of like letting this define magic, because it could be that arcane magic is supplied by your deity in the pantheon that focus is on that. And you're like, oh, okay. So like all magic is kind of divine in this setting, and figuring out the answers to those questions as you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I almost wonder if the deity is just up and left, for example. I mean, arcane magic could be, with you're right, with like clerics and paladins and stuff like that, divine magic, it's obvious. But with arcane magic, what if the presence of arcane magic is just kind of the essence of the gods, hovering around this world almost, and then they pull out, they're gone.
Yeah. Or what if they don't leave and they stay and make it very apparent that it is because like they're like, we're no longer showing you favor. Like I'm almost imagining like mortals being able to look up into the sky and seeing like a humongous heavenly body of a god staring down silently on the planet, on the plane of existence, and when they go to cast magic, just being like, and just having like this almost like apocalyptic, like you have people like in the streets yelling up at these divine figures, like, why have you done this to us? Why have you done this to us? Like, it kind of a chilling like image.
It is, yeah.
So we had started to mention it a little bit, especially with the idea that like we can't communicate anymore because we did sending. But I was trying to think of like what are other impacts on the world, literal ones, like with a meteor, obviously, but other ones about when the magic goes away.
Yeah, that's so. I mean, immediately, I think that a huge impact on the players would obviously be, spells. There's that practical reality that would kind of like break some systems. But I also think of, especially the one that comes to mind is healing. Healing is huge. Mm-hmm. Like the idea that in a lot of role-playing game worlds, you can cure disease just like that.
Or bring back to life. Yeah.
Yeah, bring back to, exactly. Like healing is a huge power. That would just be, it would have a huge impact. And we probably don't even think how much healing and resurrection and things like that actually do have an impact in our campaign worlds. We probably just kind of, are a bit flippant with it actually. But, would it even be the case that they would have, for example, people really trained in medicine and like bandaging things and the splint and all this stuff, right? Or would they just rely on magic for all of that? I guess it depends how high magic or how present magic is in your world, pervasive.
Yeah, there might be different societies that didn't have many mages or wizards or clerics among them, and so they might end up being, whereas maybe they weren't powerful societies in the old world, in the new world, they are leaps and bounds ahead because they haven't had the convenience of relying on magic to heal, to resurrect, to fix broken bones and wounds, and now it that healing aspect, I think you're right, is one of the biggest things in my mind that would really throw the world into turmoil.
Yeah, and I love that what you said about the shifting of power dynamic. That those who have not relied on magic and who have been strong through other means or had talent in other ways would suddenly find themselves very powerful.
That evil wizard that held power over his minions or a people group or maybe even a nation, right? With a clenched fist and casting magical spells. Just a frail old man now. That's all that wizard is. They're going to be toppled really quickly.
Because my other thing was like, okay, so I can't raise undead, but are they still undead? Like, I forgot.
Yeah, how does magic being gone affect the world as in monsters too? Like, do some monsters just cease to exist? Like, I don't know, like weirds and
like
elementals.
All the flumps just fall out of the sky.
No.
Golems, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that kind of gets me to wondering too, like, so the deities is certainly one option, but what if many people did decide that this getting rid of magic is our only hope, actually, because it's done more harm than good, because this evil wizard has dominated and now rules this empire, or because there's an army of the dead, and getting rid of magic will actually cause them to just fall. That idea that magic is a detriment actually is interesting too.
Yeah, I like that idea that you're pointing out. Almost that, like, when I was thinking about this originally, I was thinking about this as like something happens, magic is gone, and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, what the heck?" and they're just all surprised by it. And I think that probably it makes sense that a lot of people would be, but what if, one, there were people that were the agents of this change and have been working towards this change, and so this is no surprise to them, and if that's the case, that they've been working towards this, maybe this has been something that has been an underground movement for thousands of years, those people are going to be prepared much better than the people who weren't expecting this. But also, like, you could have, if we were bringing it back to the divine aspect of it, and the gods being unpleased with mortals or whatever it is, you could have some sort of like prophetic voices amongst the world before this event happens that are calling out like, you're going to bring ruin on us. There will be no more magic. The gods are going to leave, or the gods are going to punish us by this. And those are going to be the guys that people walk past and they're like, oh man, that crazy guy over there. But what happens when that actually comes to fruition? People are like, oh man, like that guy wasn't as crazy. Or even in the sense of like, we've talked about it on the podcast before, but what if like magic has a source that isn't endless? And so you could have these people shouting in the streets of like, you're using magic and you're not paying attention to it. You're just using it to like clean your houses or do silly things. Like, we're going to lose it. This is going to bring destruction. It's interesting to think about like the two differences of a world that was unprepared for it, a world that heard about it, and then people that were completely prepared for it and trying to bring it on.
The magic battery is low. The magic battery is low.
Please replace.
Yeah, I kind of, you mentioned cleaning houses, like I'm reading Harry Potter to my kids, and I do sometimes wonder, like, is this, I'm not super into Harry Potter, but I read it a number of years ago, and I'm reading it to my kids. And it's interesting to think how frivolously it's often used, and I do wonder, like, how does it work? Does this exhaust them? Is it somewhat tiring to use magic, or is it just like, no, this is an endless font, and draw from it, and do the dishes?
Yeah. Is it completely free of consequences? Or is there even a consequence that they don't know of that could be happening that does eventually reveal itself, which could be the whole thing that we're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
They need to find renewable sources of magic.
Yeah. Well,
Solar.
and that maybe that's where you take this setting idea, and maybe there are sources of like, can you imagine a world where magic has disappeared? However, there are still sources of magic in the world. Like, how, if a wizard can no longer cast his spells, but a wand can be used, that wand is now like a prized artifact. And honestly, the world is going to have people that are going to be willing to kill to have, and even worse beyond kill, like to be able to grasp onto that power that once was. And the more that those objects get used up, the more that people are going to be willing to do some pretty awful things to acquire that power.
Yeah, that's still going back to the idea of like, okay, so what is left over? Because one of the interesting things would be like, okay, so we just have this clear delineating line of magic, no magic. And if you had players that were of a certain level, do they still have spells? But once they use them, they lose them. And like that's it. There's no way to replenish it. My other thought was there is by getting a hold of magic items and like drawing that last bit of magic in the earth into themselves to like recuperate. And like that's how you have your spellcasting classes work then on.
I just want to state that I think that probably all of us, I hope, would say that the best way to go, or the worst way to go about this, would be to start a new campaign, have all your players choose magic users, and then all of a sudden be like, nope, you can't do any of that.
Yeah.
That'd be so mean.
Oh, totally.
No, the worst version is having half of them. Because in your scenario...
Yes, so that some of them are completely like, it doesn't bother us.
Right at kind of right before like the climax of the campaign, where like they're going to be facing the big bad soon. Things are getting very difficult and threatening, and nope, 3 of the 5 of you no longer have your powers.
You're completely nerfed. You remember how you were a glass cannon being a wizard? Now you're just glass.
Yeah, you're just a porcelain doll. But
Yeah. So how would you like go about presenting this practically to a group?
That's a good question. I think I'd want to think about it more and think about how, like, when is this going to take place? At the very beginning, at the end, like, because I think maybe there's a way that you could like have it be completely open and have there be magic users and non-magic users, or maybe like all magic users set up. And if there are answers to the solution, right? Like we're talking about like objects, or maybe there are sources of magic power that can be claimed in like a crystal or something that your wizard needs, and eventually that crystal breaks and it can cause an issue, but it's something that's solvable. I think I'd say you want to make sure that you really think about how you're going to do that, and that it's going to be done in a way that your players are going to have fun and a good time with it. But I mean, another easy answer is starting a campaign and taking magic using classes off the table and having them be more the NPCs that have lost those powers, but you're playing with strictly fighter characters and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even picking a system that doesn't have magic could work. And, you know, the goal of the campaign could be to bring magic back, maybe. That's one of the main aims. But yeah, the rule system itself, therefore, would have still a lot of variety and different classes and options and things like that without magic.
Yeah, I like a challenge as a player. So like sometimes like I could see like in the right mindset being like, oh, we got 3 levels into this campaign and we're all wizards, and then this is brought up, and then like the DM being like, all right, so you just experienced this, now you understand what's going on. I want you all to level up again and choose another class. Like, how is your I used to be a wizard, or I used to be a sorcerer, now I don't have that, and so now I'm taking my staff and I'm becoming a monk. And like there could be a way of taking that difficult situation, but one of the things we always say is you got to know your players, right? Because some players are going to see that as just complete and total punishment, and some players are going to see that as like a challenge. And I don't know, I guess there could be like an upfrontness to it of like, guys, just so you know, like I'm not going to tell you what's going to happen in the story, but you're not going to be consistently leveling up as a magic user. There could be some like upfrontness to the campaign in that way.
And figuring
Absolutely.
out like what you could also have a breakpoint, like let's say it's first level spells, because I feel pretty confident I could probably explain ways that you're accomplishing those without using magic. So then that's another way. Or like you said, that they get those first few levels, but that's it. That's the cap. Like there's no more. Like what you got is what you got. And then because then you also can switch into people becoming these like rarefied items that like that mage can keep doing it, but no one else can learn it. And no one else can get higher level. So then you have this high level mage who's now coming into even more power because no one can reach my level. I'm over 9,000. Like, but the idea that that's it. No one else will get there.
Yeah. And I think, it's a cool idea for character development, I think, in a way too. If you did do that method where you say, all right, you're all magic users, but now you're all going to be taking different classes. Like, you know, we often look for those ways to develop character and not just be a static being who's always the same, but show some growth. And what a cool way to actually have to pick a new class and figure out like what would my character do now? What would they train in and try to become good at so they could survive more readily in this world?
Yeah, and it's good to hear somebody else say that because definitely it's nice to recognize that, yeah, some players might think, what a cool idea. But I also know that I know players that would be like, oh, this is punishment. Like,
yeah.
This isn't fun. Like, you took my powers from me. I worked on this really hard. And that is sometimes the difficult role of being a DM and having a story that you want to engage in, right? Is you want to, at the same time, make sure that you're recognizing that this is a experience that you have with a number of people at your table, and you want to make sure that everyone is having fun. So, but yeah, having conversations up front might not be a bad idea, because it might get people into the right mindset to be able to grasp onto that as a good thing and something to role play through.
Yeah, because you'll definitely have the player who has spent 10, 20 hours planning out the next 20 levels that they absolutely will not get to. But then
I've got those players.
But then that's part of it, is that they're 3 levels in, and now you just completely derailed this long-term plans that they had. So, surprise, talk to your players.
Yeah. I'm really glad you asked that, Nate. That's a really interesting question when we're talking about this type of setting or campaign that should be asked and should be talked through. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, coming to that realization that, Magic No More, it's just not going to be for everyone. And being okay with that. If you have your gaming group and you want to game with these people, just, they might not go for it. And so that's okay. Maybe then you start.
Some people might say, that's why I play D&D, because of the magic. Right. But at the same time, recognizing that this idea that we're bringing into play here is not to say that there won't be magic in your campaign, whether it is finding different sources or a solution, or encountering magic as something that other creatures have beyond you mortal characters that are the PCs. But certainly there still can be that, but I want to, as a player, I want to play a character that can do these things. So yeah, knowing your players, knowing if they're going to be on board with this type of campaign, and maybe that's a good thing to do, is to go, we're going to try it out, but I'm not going to plan for this to be a 3-year-long campaign. Maybe I'll plan for something that's a shorter story that maybe can blossom into a longer story, to see where my players are at.
So the other topic we had was definitely impact on the future of your world, which is interesting because you decide what point did this happen? How far out are we? And one of my thoughts was also it's an in-between campaign thing. Nate, you had mentioned it, but let's say they kill that big bad, and then all the magic goes away. And then you could have, I'm just pulling random numbers, but let's say they're level 10. And you say, we're going to start a new campaign 10 years after this one. And it's totally up to you if you want to bring your character forward. And if it's a fighter, it's pretty straightforward. But if it's a wizard, we can have that discussion if you want to keep playing that character, and what is that character development over these 10 years, and what are the things you do and you learn. But my big thought was what does your world do? Do they go forward with technology? Or is it this big kind of technological step back? Or is it both, depending on who? And the future.
Well, first off, I love that idea of the end of one campaign, magic going away, and then starting 10 years later, because it does prep your players to choose, do we want to continue playing in this world with this,
and maybe even get them excited about it.
Right, exactly. I think that's a great way to go. And or and if they don't go for it, then okay, maybe we go back in time and we play 500 years before our current campaign. That would be kind of cool too. Anyway, that's just a comment on that. But the future of your world, that's what I'm going to have to think about a second.
I think that technology would, there would be this shift in, we talked about healing and societies that maybe didn't have the reliance on magic, and so now their knowledge of medicine is going to be really important, and is going to be people are going to be trying to learn these new skills and spread this type of knowledge, and there may be diseases that magic was a cure for, and no vaccine or cure for it ever, as far as science goes, was ever necessary. Does do all magic diseases like lycanthropy, being its roots in being a curse, is that gone, or is there now no easy way to cure it, and having to deal with that problem. So technology, I think, is something that's going to have to, in the world, be more of a priority, and people are moving in that direction. Also, maybe a change in the way that militaries and like arms are like focused on. If a city had a army of mages, that city is now pretty defenseless. If a city had a force field around it of magic that like protected itself from the dark forces or monsters outside, they're going to have to start building like actual stone walls to help with that. There has to be this shift in this. Now we have to come up with non-magical means to solve our problem. And you're gonna have this. If you do jump over the course of 50 years in a campaign setting or to a different campaign completely, you could even start in the same city or town or location wherever you are, and you jump into it having described it in the one campaign, and now 50 years later, you're describing a very different looking place because things have changed so much.
Man, all I can think of right now is Dalaran in World of Warcraft, and like, did you have it slowly fall out of it? It's a city I guess for the people not inducted to the cult of World of Warcraft, it's a floating city. So then you turned magic off. Like, did it slowly fall and now it's in a weird place, or did it just crash into the ground? And like, thinking of those things as you come across them in your world would be really fun as a DM. Like, if I had built this world and had players living in it, and then just like kind of thinking like, okay, so it's gone, what happens here, and how extreme is it? Like a dimmer switch, or was it like a light switch?
And what if there are multiple cities that like relied on some like floating magic or force field to protect them? Like, your world could literally, depending on how dependent on magic they are, it could go from like vast sprawling cities to ruins all across the planet. And now you have this very apocalyptic, like, people are organized in tribes that live outside of the ruins. It could look extremely different because of that.
Yeah, I like that post-apocalyptic idea. I mean, in some ways, magic disappearing is an apocalypse.
Yeah.
I like what you said, Mitch, about the weapons and military technology. And I kind of wonder, would gunpowder now actually be something that slowly starts to develop? Because before it was magic, that was playing that role of firing a weapon sort of thing. And now, over time, that starts to develop. And so this world did not have muskets and things like that. But now, 50 years after magic leaving, they actually do.
And that's cool. That's like something to excite your players with. It's like, all right, the world has changed. Yeah, wizard is off the table now, but gunslinger as a class now opens up. And like, you can open doors while shutting other ones, right? That like can be exciting. And like you said, Nate, like, if your players aren't into it, like, cool, we'll go back in time to when there's more magic, right? Like, I hear you. I love you guys. I love you, girl. Like, everybody playing in my group, like, you're all great. Like, we're gonna go back and we're gonna play and we're gonna enjoy it. But like, some players might be like, sweet, you tell me gunpowder is now created? I'm in. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
So one of our favorite questions is homework. I feel like you appreciate that term, which is the best homework ever. Like, we're going to tell you movies, books, podcasts, things that you could go listen to, look at, and experience. Ideas that would help kind of continue to give you inspiration. So do we have any of those?
Yeah, I've got a bunch.
Yes.
I think I do. So here's kind of an odd one. Children of Men. I saw the movie a number of years back, and then I also read the book. Actually, I listened to the audiobook while I was painting my house one summer. And it's actually about, if I'm remembering correctly, a world in which, and it's pretty, I think, modern, sort of near future, if I remember correctly, but no women are able to bear children anymore. No one's having babies. And that as kind of an inspiration for how, and I think it's mysterious, if I remember correctly. And the premise of the book is that there's one woman who's pregnant now. And so, I mean, you could use that inspiration too. There's one source of magic left, or there is one spellcaster left in this world. And what would that be like, man? So that's a big one. But I think another one is Wheel of Time series, because there was like a magical cataclysm of sorts in that world, by which basically men are no longer safe as spellcasters. And when they are discovered, they are put down, they're gentled. And it totally just changed the way magic works. And it's much more low magic. And I think a lot of fantasy settings in books are much lower magic, less pervasive magic than in your typical D&D game. So there's a lot of inspiration to be had in lots of fantasy worlds. But those are two that came to mind. I've got a few others, but what do you guys think?
I'll be honest. I was having a hard time trying to figure out a campaign setting where this was something that was prevalent. But I'm just gonna remark on especially your Children of Men thing, because you brought up this other way to go about this with your players in that. Because what if your PCs that are wizards or are sorcerers, they don't lose their magic. They still have it in a world where they're the only ones. At first, it's going to seem like, oh, awesome, we're fantastic. But like, just like in Children of Men, like those characters don't walk around saying, oh, she's pregnant. It's like, no, we have to keep this under wraps. And like, imagine when you go back into a town that some like people have been dying and hurting because of lack of magic, your characters walk in and proclaim that they have magic. Like, you might have a couple days of like, oh, this is great, but eventually you're going to be exhausted. And as soon as you say, you say to somebody, I don't have the amount of spells to cast it on all of you, things are going to turn ugly. And I think that would be a really interesting thing to be playing as undercover like magic users in that world. I love that.
So I am going to suggest the movie Onward.
Yes, that was on my list.
Okay,
too.
good. Yeah,
good.
because I
didn't think about that, but that's
it's
great.
definitely looking at it really far into the future of like it clearly at one point very fantasy magical world, but not really anymore. Oh, but maybe, because now Dad in Pants. Dad is Pants. That's what one of our other hosts, he's like, the name of the movie should not have been Onward. It should have been Dad is Pants. And I'm like, okay. But yeah, so that was my idea, because it's definitely way set out. So because we talked about my time jump being 10 years, what if it's 1,000? So
yeah. Yeah, in the intro to that movie where they show just someone like, with a light bulb, just like, and it's like way back when like,
yep.
Whoa. And this guy who's casting magic is just like, oh, well, I guess we don't really need this anymore. They have a light bulb, and it just progresses from there. And yeah,
that's a good point too. Like maybe Magic No More isn't a cataclysmic event. Maybe it's technology and science becoming the primary means, and gunpowder and things take place of it, and it's just something that's forgotten. It doesn't have to be something that happens like that. It could be something that takes a while, but eventually, yeah. And maybe your PCs are the last remaining wizards at a school that is giant, but now is kind of almost looks like it's ruins because nobody cares anymore. That would be interesting to do as well.
Yeah.
Nate, thank you so much again for joining us on this episode. We really enjoyed having this great discussion with you. For any of our listeners out there who would like to check out more of what you do, where are the best places for them to go and check that out?
Yeah, so if you go to youtube.com/WASD20, that's the main hub for what I do, posting videos almost every week, a couple times a month anyway. And then I also have a Patreon, patreon.com/WASD20. You can find me on Twitter, on Facebook, and Instagram. And I also have a website that I update from time to time, and it has some good resources, especially like a beginner's guide to D&D, and that's at wasd20.net.
Fantastic. Go and check those things out. Check out what Nate does. And yeah, Nate, great having you on the show, and we'd love to have you on again in the future.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks for having me.
We want to thank Nate again for joining us on this episode, and I hope that you all have enjoyed listening to this discussion about Magic No More. If you've ever done this in your homebrew games, in your homebrew world, where you've created a world where magic was once prevalent and then it disappeared by whatever means, we'd love to hear about it. You can write us an email at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com. And if you liked this episode or any of our previous or future episodes, we would love it if you could head over to either Apple Podcast or whatever podcast app you're using and leave us a 5-star review. If you do, we will give you a shout out at the beginning of this show, and thank you so much for doing so. You can follow us on Twitter at DMS_block, that's at DMsBlock, and you can like our Facebook page. Both of those places are great places to go for updates about the show. As always, the Dungeon Masters Block is a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network. Check out other shows like Geek Wars, Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, Detentions and Dragons, and more. Well, that's all we have for this show of the Dungeon Masters Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the egos of all other people at the table. I'm DM Mitch, reminding you to always keep on dungeon mastering.